It all started with a very simple idea. Tell the stories of how successful middle market CEOs made it to the corner office. I'm Brant Handley, founder and managing director of Resource Options International, or ROI. We're the USA's premier executive search firm focused exclusively on empowering middle market companies to attract, hire, and retain A players while transforming top executives' careers and lives. ROI's Into the Corner office is dedicated to discovering how middle market CEOs advance their career, and we're making these remarkable and sometimes quite unbelievable stories available to you for the very first time. Listen and learn about the challenges they've overcome, the interesting people they've met along the way, and the lessons learned that steered these executives' unique journey into a middle market corner office of their own. I know you enjoy these CEO stories as much as I've enjoyed recording them. So thank you for listening today. And if you like what you've heard, rate us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm looking forward to you joining me on the next great middle market CEO adventure into the corner office. Our guest today is CEO Scott Montgomery. Scott has over 3 decades in the bike and outdoor industries, most recently serving as CEO of Nutcase, where he orchestrated a merger with Bravo Sports in 2016. He started his career working alongside his dad to build Cannondale, starting at the young age of 11 and coming on full-time after completing college. Prior to that, Scott was with Scott Sports and also CEO of Club Ride Apparel. Scott Montgomery, welcome into the corner office.
Thank you.
You know, you've got a very exciting background. I've enjoyed reading about it, and I want to hear more about going to work with your dad back at the age of 11. So maybe let's start with that. Tell us a little bit about what your early years were like. Your dad sounds like he was an entrepreneur as well.
Yeah, he was. Both my dad and my grandfather. I was a kind of kid that when you hung out with your dad, mostly it was around a work environment. I fell asleep at a restaurant dinner table more than once at 10 or 11 o'clock when we were still having an impromptu meeting that I was attending.
And was your dad and granddad always in the sports equipment and the bike industry? What was their backgrounds?
My grandfather started a industrial glove company during the Depression because rubber was no longer available because it started to be in high demand. Actually, that wasn't during the Depression. It was during World War II, and there was not enough rubber because it was required for war. So he built a company called Edmont that built latex gloves, which preserved people's hands a lot better. And then my father was involved in businesses since I can remember, but the one that really I latched onto was Cannondale, which he started when I was 10 or 11.
And so what was it like, growing up as a kid of an entrepreneur?
Well, you certainly saw the good, the bad, and the ugly. I think everybody always expects that it's just, big success. And fortunately, we were able to have a lot of that. But the real entrepreneurial life, as you probably know, is a lot of hardship. And
a lot of cyclical.
It is. And it's a lot of hanging in there when things are tough and keeping a positive outlook and finding a way to keep the lights on even when there's no money in the bank.
So did you kind of feel some of that when you were growing up and, times would be good and times would be kind of tough and peanut butter and sandwich was kind of what was on the dinner table that night?
Yes. Most of my time working with my father at Cannondale, we went public in 94. And honestly, of the years that I worked there, the vast majority were extremely challenging. Very, very few of it what I would call successful, though. We were always growing, but people didn't realize how difficult it was to keep, particularly when a business is growing quickly, to keep cash coming in to support the growth.
A lot of cash has to go in to keep it going. So was that full-time work then? Did you do other things when you were growing up? Was there the paper route or the selling the mistletoe or other types of things that you did while you were going to school in your early years?
Well, my mother tells me that I sold rocks at 5. I don't know if I don't know if that's quite true or not, but she tells me that. And I do remember starting a bike shop in an empty garage with another friend at 8. I sold seeds to get sports equipment so I could have a nice new basketball at around 10. So
nice.
I don't remember anybody teaching me to do that stuff. It just seemed like I was a very middle-class family in a small apartment. And if you wanted things, the expectation is you had to figure out how to get them.
What part of the country did you grow up in?
Columbus, Ohio.
And was that all the way through your junior high and high school years?
Mostly my mother and stepfather, later in life, we moved down to Texas for a few years to finish up high school, but a little bit of time down there, but mostly in Ohio.
Any other extracurriculars while you were going to school? It sounds like sports was a part of it. Were you competitive or did more of the off-road racing and, bike riding and so forth? What were the kind of things that, kept you busy outside of school?
I would say mostly the normal things, sports for sure. I was very fortunate to enjoy that. I was probably not as good as I thought I was, but a little bit of student government. I did a few things in high school around keg parties and stuff that I'm not very proud of today. I would kill my son or daughter if they did that, but
yes, that's right.
Fortunately, we got through that unscathed and have moved on.
And studies-wise, were you a good student? You excel in your classes? Anything in particular you liked in kind of those junior high school years?
Not particularly. I was very fortunate. My grandfather, when I was in fifth grade, kind of financed me going to a private school.
Nice.
And that gave me a huge advantage because for two reasons. One, I got around a lot of really well-to-do, smart families, and that one of my friend's parents owned the Pittsburgh Pirates, and you were like, wow, what a lucky guy you are.
Yeah.
So it exposed me to opportunities that I probably wouldn't have had in maid school, but I certainly was just an average student. I did like math, and I definitely enjoyed school, but I was never one of the kids that could get great grades.
Was Cannondale kind of a full-time then job for you while you were going to school, or was that something that you weren't much involved with in high school?
I did stay involved in it in high school, and I think that's where I continued to really enjoy that and got closer to it. In college, I did some other things. I ended up getting talked into selling dictionaries door to door by a friend of mine. And any time that I'm feeling somewhat overwhelmed in a job, I just think back and say, well, I could be in Detroit, Michigan in 1984 on a $12 bicycle going door to door. And let me tell you, when you wake up a highly underpaid, non-working husband who's probably had 6 beers and been on the couch all afternoon, you're just glad to get out of his way, much less not get beaten up. So,
oh my God. How many years did you do that?
I did it a summer and a half, and wow. I will say that was a great experience. Though, if you learn to support yourself, you'll never starve.
What were some of the key lessons that you picked up in, not just that job, some of the other part-time work you did while in high school and college?
I would just say mostly that I did learn from my father and grandfather that I did like to work. And I still do. I credit my wife for pushing me to go on vacation more than I have in the past. But I definitely learned a very strong work ethic.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And did you go to college right away out of high school? Well, you were at a private high school, it sounds like, right?
Yeah.
Prior to going to college. And tell me about your college selection process and, what you ended up studying.
Well, I ended up going to a school down in Florida called Reynolds College, which, again, I was very fortunate. My grandfather was able to help me with. And I started out my freshman year really enjoying political science and a lot of history. But then I realized, I remember after one break over Christmas, I came back and I met with a professor, and I was like, there's no way I could have gotten, a D- on my exam. And which brought my grade down to a C. And he showed me the paper all marked in red, and it was a turning point. I said, well, I'm going to move towards business because I'm good at that and I can get good grades. And I frankly was kind of tired of getting beat up in the some of the other classes that I found very interesting. So
what was your interest in political science? How did that kind of come about?
Just probably my mother was a history buff and a school teacher. So I think she just kind of being around that. But I certainly I did not excel at it at all.
Well, it sounds like your parents had some, pretty strong influence on you. What were some of the leadership lessons you got from mom and dad?
Well, I was really lucky to have my father running businesses and my grandfather from a very, my grandfather was mostly retired by the time I remember, but just showing how to treat people.
Mm.
My grandfather had an exceptional ability to have a common touch, and he was the least arrogant man I've ever met in my life, and that just showing you that way to treat people. And my father was excellent at that as well. My father made me at Cannondale the first year and a half do pretty much every entry level job in the company, and that was fantastic because it built relationships and it also told you to not expect to have things handed to you. You had to work hard for them.
Yeah. So you said you ended up getting a business degree at Rawlings. And what other type of work did you do while you were at school, other than selling the encyclopedias?
Yeah, that was pretty much it. I was ready to go get an MBA after I finished college, and my father really said, "Hey, come to Cannondale, and I'll give you a real world MBA." And that was great. Though I did over the course of the next 10 years, I would take leadership and other MBA like programs. I did the Harvard Owners President's Program. I did something in with Columbia. I did something with the American School of Management, I think in Paris, on finance. So definitely along the way, I supported that because I do really believe those skills that you get are needed. But he did well by me. He really did teach me the business from the ground up at Cannondale, which was a very fortunate opportunity.
So you went there full time after you graduated?
Absolutely.
And how long were you there?
I was there basically 84 to 97.
Oh, wow. Quite a long period of time. And so that's kind of when you went through the rotation and did all the entry level jobs, or had you been doing that during summers while you were, still in high school?
A little bit in high school, but mostly in that period. And then I remember one night at about 8:30, which was usually the time he and I would have conversations. You never wanted to ask for anything with him in the morning because you wouldn't get any attention. But he said to me, "Would you be interested in moving to Europe and starting Cannondale Europe?" And I think I was 27 at the time. And
Wow.
I was like, absolutely. And in 2 weeks, I had packed my bags and was off to Europe. And what a sensational opportunity for a young man to be able to live in Europe. And especially at that time, the wall was coming down. The unification of Europe was coming together. So it was a very dynamic period in history.
Were you single at the time, or moved your family over there?
Yes, I was single, which I think I couldn't have done it any other way because we were working ridiculous hours.
So did you build a team there? Was that part of what you had to do, or was there an existing business already? Tell me a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, that was really the first time I got to set up a real company. Another gentleman in our company and myself went over and we started in an office, just the two of us. And within 2.5 years, we had built a strong organization, a European headquarters with an assembly facility, and we took off in the market. I'll never forget. I was presenting a business plan, which that was pretty early on, and we were in the Netherlands, and we were on the 5th floor of the bank, and it wasn't in Amsterdam. It was in a small town outside of the center of the Netherlands. And the banker listened to our plan, and he said, "Well, young men, this is the Netherlands. We know more about the bicycle than probably anybody in the entire world. And I thank you so much for coming today, but we have no interest." And so I walked up to him to the elevator and I said, I don't remember his name, but I said, "Listen, this business is going to be successful. And you really need to change your mind about this. We're going to be a great customer." And he kind of looked at me, befuddled. And by the time I moved to Japan, he could no longer approve our loans. They had to be approved by his boss's boss in Amsterdam.
That's awesome. So you ended up doing business with them, though, in the end.
Yeah, we did end up going with him. But and I think that's another part of definitely entrepreneurship. I'm sure you've learned as well that you can't accept no. You just have to, when somebody says no, that just means you've got more work to do.
That's right. So how many years were you in Europe?
Actually, only three, but it was going very quickly. And then my business partner that had come over with me, he really felt like he wanted to take over the operation. And I said, that's great, it's launched. And then I moved straight to Japan and set up the facility there, which was great, a great opportunity as well.
Kind of did it all over again. 2 or 3 years over there as well?
Exactly.
So looking at those two international assignments where you pretty much just started from scratch, I know you had a base business in the US, a good product, but you had to do the introduction, you had to, establish the relationships as you shared. What would you say were some of the biggest challenges from the people standpoint? How did you kind of find good people and ensure that they were the folks that, really were the right ones for Cannondale?
Yeah, I think in that way, that's where I've been the luckiest in life. I have just always seemed to be able to find good people. And, I really define a business as at the 30,000 foot level is really three things. Usually a great product, outstanding people, and capital. And if you have those three things, you ultimately will be successful. It just comes down to hard work. But I just feel fortunate that I've had the ability to run into great people and hire great people who ultimately were better at a lot of the functions than I was, or when put in the right environment, have blossomed. And I continue to think that if you have great people and finding great people, which I know you have a tremendous amount of experience with, is one of the most important things to building a successful business.
But it's got to be tough to do that in a new market. You don't necessarily speak the language. I know the Dutch are very proficient in English, but still, you've got cultural differences. Japan must have been a challenge. How did you kind of, pivot your learnings about hiring good people in the US and the teams that you built there, in those international markets? Did you find that the same characteristics were true? In other words, finding people that were good at certain areas, that were obviously experts. Obviously, what I mean by that is kind of disciplinary expertise. Did you find cultural things that you tried to look for? Talk to me a little bit about how you, kind of sorted through those in those international markets.
Well, I would say what my father taught me for sure was to always look for people that were passionate about what they were doing. So certainly in the cycling industry, if you have a love for riding a bike, that's a great starting point. And then really generally empowering people to let them soar. I think another area that's important, and my father also taught me, is really don't try to build jobs around boxes, but build jobs around people. So even if you're in, say, marketing, but you are a good salesperson, well, don't hesitate to design the job around the person's skill set. And if somebody is just, say, not very organized, and that is holding them back one facet of their job, then don't, rather than try to make them be good at that, to put them back in the box, be more flexible to say, well, hey, the person over here in purchasing is better at that. So even though that is technically a marketing function, we're going to hand that piece of the job to somebody else. And that builds a interdependency and also a really nice, keeps people good at doing what they're good at. And generally, if you're doing what you're good at, you're going to feel good about it and do it well. And if you have something that you hate about your job, if you can
throw it over the fence, right?
Exactly. So I think that's what I learned on that. And that has served me very well, because especially in more mid-market companies like you and I have talked about, it's sometimes you can't find the person that's absolutely perfect. But if they're good at 8 out of the 10 functions, then you should not to discourage them because there's one or two things that they're not as good at. That's not a good way to keep a good person happy.
So 97, I think, is when you said you moved on from Cannondale. Was that a tough thing, or was that a kind of a natural transition at the time with the company?
Yeah, in hindsight, it was probably the biggest mistake I ever made in my career.
Really?
Yeah, it changed the balance of power within the organization. So in hindsight, but I did it for good reasons at the time.
Was Dad still there at the time?
Yeah, he was. But I had a young family, and I had probably overworked up to that time. And I I had a sense that if I didn't establish a good relationship with my kids, I might miss out on that. So I did it for personal reasons. And I can say, which is, I think, at the end of the day, the most important thing. I've got wonderful children who I love very much, and are strong individuals. So that was well worth it. But it definitely hurt our business, and that is what it is.
Well, you don't get that time back with family, right? The kids are only young ones. So it sounds like you did it for the right reasons. And at that time, then, did you go into more entrepreneurial pursuits? Tell me about what kind of came next.
Yeah, I really took some personal time, and we had taken the company public. So I was pretty freed up financially. Learned to fly an airplane, did some things, built a house in Arizona. But then I ended up coming back into the business, and it was a very hard time because our business had gone through a reorganization. But it was also tremendously dynamic, and I learned a tremendous amount, because I think there's this kind of natural thinking in life that if you just work hard every day and move forward, that every day will be better, and the next and the next. It's a little bit of kind of the American dream. But I think if you look at most people's lives, even ones that are extremely successful in, say, their careers, between health and family and other issues, environment of certainly things like recessions in '08, you're probably going to go through some tough periods. And so anyway, coming back into the company and reorganizing, I learned a tremendous amount, and that actually made me a stronger business person, because I think you do learn more through adversity than you do actually when everything's working really well. When everything's working well, I kind of want to say anybody can run the company. It's it's when you wake up and it's 2008 and 32% of your futures orders melted in 90 days, and your bank comes in and wants to lower your credit line, and
25% of your customers just went bankrupt.
Exactly. That's when you have to look in the mirror and pull your pants up and say, I don't know how I'm going to get through today, but I better get at it.
I better be a big boy today.
Exactly.
So I want to go back to something that's been a real common thread in these interviews, and it's so great to hear and refreshing to hear you say it, Scott. But you talked about passion, right? And how important that is. Have you found that, obviously Cannondale is so special given that you got involved at such a young age, and Dad's been a big part of it. And of course, lots of friends and I'm sure family members and so forth. But, leaving a family-owned company, even after it goes public, and then moving on to something else, have you been able to continue to find that passion? How have you kept that alive, I guess, is the question I'm asking as it relates to the pursuits that you followed since then?
That's a great question. I think whether you own the majority of the shares or somebody else does, at the end of the day, if you feel the responsibility for the people that work for you, or work with you, because that's really what it is, then it doesn't really matter whether it's family or non-family, and you have a sense of personal pride and sense of responsibility. So I've been fortunate to stay mostly in the sports and outdoor arena, which is a passion of mine. I'm a very active person, but I think that hasn't been hard for me, because generally, whether the company is different or not, I can fall in love with the products. And once you fall in love with the products, then the people, which you do as well, then you don't want to let them down. They're trusting you for guidance. You want to make sure that you do the very best you can do for them.
That's great. Good to hear. Other than passion, is there anything else that you think is kind of a common denominator in your career and the success that you've had?
I would always say to any young person or younger person that, of course, follow your passions as early in life as you can. I would never take a job out of college that had X more remuneration over something that you were really loved. I think that if you do what you love, you will probably excel at it over time, and that will show and reflect in the people that you work with. So I did have one,
and the rewards will come. right? Yeah.
Yeah, I did have one time where I stepped out. I had an interest in education for my mother, and I tried to build a charter school, and I can honestly say I did not a very good job of it, and I didn't put much time and money, fortunately, into it. But I think you have to love what you're doing, and then you will love the people generally around it, and it'll attract the same kinds of people with the same kinds of interests. So I definitely would say that I think that is important to try to pick things that you really believe in, because as your life goes on, I mean, you're going to spend 8, 10, 12 hours a day probably.
That's right.
Which is a significant portion of your time you're awake. So if you're doing something you love and are excited about, then you'll probably be a lot better at it than if it's just trying to make that extra ring on the ladder or that extra compensation number.
Well, that old adage, find something you love and you never work a day in your life, right?
Yeah, that's great. That's a great line.
Your first CEO position now, was that at Scott Sports or was it Club Ride Apparel?
It was really Club Ride.
Yeah.
Assuming you take out the Cannondale Europe and Japan, though, I did have a parent company to lean on, and that was extremely important. But Club Ride was the first time when I really had to manage all aspects, and that was a really great experience, and it was the first time that I didn't have somebody to lean on at all. So that was
Now, were you placed? Did you come up through the ranks there? No, I believe you came in as CEO, correct?
Yeah, but it was really CEO could
small.
Be. Yeah, it was a really small company. There were
They
were basically the founder and myself. So we unpacked the boxes and and cleaned the toilets for sure.
Did whatever it takes, right?
Yeah, but well, I think we built it into a reasonably sized company before I moved on, and that was a great experience for me to have that opportunity, especially to go out and do the banking 100% on my shoulders and the raise the private equity. Raising private equity is an element that pretty much every entrepreneur and CEO has to deal with, and that oftentimes can be it's probably. I mean, people's always your biggest challenge, but it's certainly second if your business is growing.
And did you leave there at an event? Was it a private equity investment that led you to move on at that stage to, I guess it was Nutcase was next, right?
Yeah, Nutcase was next. I mean, I think it's fair to say that I'm humble from the things I've done well, and also I haven't had a perfect track record. We brought in private equity money, which allowed us to grow the business to the next level. But the private equity, we had a couple of things happen, particularly with the US dollar got considerably stronger and our exports did not meet some of our expectations. And so we missed some numbers, and that ultimately led to me leaving the company. But that's part of being a CEO. You're going to be the person when you make the commitment to another person and you bring in money. If you do a good job, you should expect to stay. But if you, and I think we were still doing a good job, but we were not hitting the expectations that I had originally set. And, you're going to live by the sword and die by the sword. And, but that was still a good, in some ways, still a good experience because it enabled me to really have the responsibility and see the positives and minuses of that.
Well, you talked earlier about some of the best lessons we can learn is going through diversity, right? The 2008 to 2010 period was a tough one for me. I was involved with a business that eventually had to fold. We didn't go bankrupt. We met our creditors, but who would have thought, 2007 was a banner year and we're well on our way in 8, and then, you hit the brick wall. So tell me a little bit about some of the lessons that you took away from that experience. What, if you look back and said, gosh, it was great. We did a lot of good stuff, but what I took to my next job was fill in the blank.
Well, certainly paying attention to cash flow is so important.
Yeah, any business.
Yeah, because it can really, you can be profitable and still not be successful if you get on the wrong side. So certainly paying attention to that element. And then I think another side that I would really say is having a good lawyer is always. I think every CEO needs a strong attorney next to them as well, because the details of operating agreements, the details of covenants, the details of the financial terms and conditions, and they're getting in this litigious world that we live in, as they get more and more, as those operating agreements move to 30, 40, 50, 100 pages, paragraph 7 on page 38, which you skimmed, or maybe you read the first time and it got changed in edit number 7,
Right.
can be very tricky. So certainly not glorious, but something watching cash flow, and then also being sure to pay attention to the details and agreements can be very important.
So tell me about Nutcase, and was it a merger with Bravo Sports? It looks like it, right?
Yeah, that was a really fun year and a half. The business was a little upside down, and we were able to really get it going very quickly, back into a healthy position. We had to do some tough things like make some big expense cuts, but we made those cuts. We took them. We reacted quickly and made the changes, and added new products, and everybody worked extra hard, and we got the company really turned around in 6 months and profitable. And then we ran into the folks at Bravo Sports, and they were interested in growing and adding more cycling activities, and so they acquired the company.
Yeah, awesome. And then did you move on shortly after that, or stay on for a retained period?
Yeah, a retained period of about 3 months, 3 to 5 months, I think it was, something like that.
And now Reynolds Cycling. How exciting!
Yeah, and that's we're really excited about where we are right now with the company. We have about a 37-week from inception to finish to get a product to market, which is relatively long. So I started with the company in August, and we have our best collection of products that the company, I think, has ever had. That we will go to market really formally July 1st of this year, but we're actually starting. I'll attend an event next week, and we'll have, I think, a good, better, best product line in mountain, road, gravel, and electric bikes. So I'm really excited about the year ahead. I think we've got everything we need. We've got great products, and we have strong people, and we've been our ownership is a company out of Chicago, and they have funded the company to enable us to do that.
Well, let's talk about the people side. What do you look for when you're making bets on the people you want to invest in?
Well, I'm an optimistic person, and I generally look for people who are really have strong work ethic, love the cycling, in my case, industry or outdoor.
The passion.
Absolutely. And of course, integrity is important. You should, especially if you're bringing somebody into your organization, I generally would pay for experience. I think that's a great aspect. And tenacity and perseverance, of course, just to keep going when sometimes it doesn't. I can't tell you the number of times in my career where I've gone to bed at night with not really knowing the solution, and somehow by the morning of the next day, you found the path. But back to your key people, and I know that's something you do a lot of. Getting the right people in the right positions is absolutely imperative for a company to succeed.
How many employees now at Reynolds Cycling, if you don't mind telling us?
Yeah, we're at about, I believe, 120 on a worldwide basis.
And taking in quite a few as you grow at this stage, or kind of seeing where the market's going to lead in the next couple of weeks?
Well, certainly we have an aggressive plan for 2019, and we're already working on that. As funny as it sits, it's only April 6th of 18, but you have to be thinking ahead. And when you have the ramp up time of, it takes at least 6 months to turn a molder into a skilled molder. So you have to be thinking long term. So we'll know by the end of the summer, but I think we're hiring mostly in the production areas, And then once we get the production areas in place, and then we can look at the revenue line and the gross margin line for the future year, then we usually, around the fourth quarter, we'll back into what expenses we can afford to support that growth.
And are you involved in hiring now and doing a lot of interviewing, or is that being done more at the production staff level?
Well, our operations manager and plant manager definitely do the factory hiring, but we've brought on 9 new sales reps since August, and they are doing an excellent job. So we certainly have expanded our sales force, and now that the product line is in, I think, really good shape, I definitely will go into sales mode over the next 3 months to ensure we hit the numbers, because I find, and I think it always comes back to each CEO has to also determine what you're really good at, much as we talk about those boxes, and then make sure that you're doing what you're good at, and then support yourself. Fortunately, we have a strong leadership team of 7 leaders in the company that really share those responsibilities. A very strong CFO, and with that team, we can divide and conquer. But definitely, I'll be going back into dictionary door-to-door mode here.
Well, finding good salespeople in any organization is a challenge, right? Because it is about skill set. When you think about, interviewing salespeople, what are some of the questions you like to ask to be able to get at, the qualifications you're seeking?
Well, certainly with salespeople, they need to have an expertise in understanding the products. I'm not a huge fan, per se, of bringing somebody in that's been, let's say, a great copier salesman and then put them into, generally, for me personally, I don't look at those resumes, even if they have been exceptionally good. I've found that does not pay good dividends. I tend to look for people that have been selling like products and that also will have the relationships, because still, even in this modern age, and of course, D2C is becoming more and more important in the marketplace, but you still need the relationship and the trust of the bike shop owner or the representative or the bike brand. So having an expertise and the relationships that will, when you add the new product or they begin representing your product, they'll already have the Rolodex in the old school way of thinking of it, or they need to have those 5,000 contacts so that they can get to the front of the line as quickly as possible. So I definitely look for experience in the actual industry is the most important background.
So do you rely more on qualifications rather than what someone might say in an interview? How do you kind of conduct it? Let's say if you find someone that, as you said, selling a similar product or maybe comes from a competitor, and you are, maybe the final interviewee and it's some VP of sales or maybe a senior salesperson that is a real important person for that account. What types of questions do you ask? What are you looking for beyond the resume?
I will generally check the references, and I still do that myself because I feel that's not, I would rather not delegate that because if I call somebody that, and generally with a strong background in the industry, I'll usually get a pretty frank answer. And I find sometimes if you delegate that to maybe an HR manager, they may get the standard answer. But when you have a relationship, even if it's with a competitor, they might give you a nuanced, or they would give you an answer that would be more clear. And oftentimes that will impact the decision because they will say something subtly that makes a big difference. So I would say that's the biggest thing. I mean, of course, looking at the resume and the experience, but I would really, and of course, interviewing the person of asking the questions. But I think really then not delegating the responsibility of doing the background checks, to me, for a senior level person, is worth that time and critical. Yes.
Great. Last couple of questions, and then happy to have you add anything else that you think is important. Our audience is mostly middle market executives, those in the C-suite, those that maybe aspire to it, as well as board members, as well as CEOs. And if you kind of thought about some career and life advice, particularly those that may be starting out, a decade or so behind you and maybe have their eyes someday on either being an entrepreneur themselves. The lifeblood of the middle market really are people like your dad and your granddad who got businesses started and carry them on through the generations, or perhaps themselves looking for something, to get into that corner office sometime down the line. What's some of those, career and life advice that you'd have for those folks that you think has worked well for you?
Well, I would definitely always advise people to go small and get involved in a up and coming business versus going bigger. I think generally the more big a business is, the more likely it is going to be to already have structure and walls. With smaller companies, the downside is you will clean the bathrooms, but the
clean the bathrooms.
the upside is you'll get more. Exactly. I've always enjoyed the small, and I've said the same thing to my son. Who's hasn't decided completely yet. I think that you'll get more opportunity, you'll learn more. You also you aren't encumbered yet with some of those other things that are wonderful in life called children and spouses and mortgages and things like that. So you can take more risk. I would always encourage people in the younger areas to take that risk early, because at the end of the day, how bad is it? I was talking with one of our staff members the other day, and he said to me, I'm 25. And I'm like,
you're young.
Exactly. What really difference does it make if you fall down a few times? I would actually view that similar to me in political science in college. Learn early that what you're good at and not good at, find those environments. And then I think also, even though I was very fortunate to spend the majority of my career in a single company, I think you should also be not going those early jobs. This is not 1970 and IBM years. Technology is changing so rapidly, and there are so many great tools out there that this is the best time ever to take ideas and put yourself at risk. And you can always come back and get a more higher paying job later if you choose to with a more secure company. But I would encourage people to go out and get into that role as quickly as possible.
Well, I heard three things there. I heard, don't be afraid to fail or even find out things that you don't like to do, right? Because when you're young, you've got the time and don't have the mortgage. Number two, start small, do a lot of different things. It's important to be able, I think, to understand how to, balance a checkbook in addition to, clean the toilets or, sweep out the parking lot. And then, the third, as you've mentioned, just being entrepreneurial. There are so many new opportunities that are coming out there today. And, it doesn't fit everyone's model, but I think we've got probably more inspiration and more creativity and innovation than we've seen at any other time in our history. And there's a lot out there to do. So, Scott Montgomery, I want to thank you for your time. This has been absolutely terrific. We've enjoyed having you into the corner office.
Well, thank you very much. I've enjoyed it as well, Brent, and appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you for listening to Into the Corner Office with Brant Hanley. We hope you enjoyed hearing our guest CEO story as much as we did. If you want to hear more CEOs reveal their journey into the corner office, please subscribe via iTunes and tell your friends and colleagues. For more information about Brant, Resource Options International, and the mighty middle market, visit www.goforroi.com. We look forward to having you join us for our next episode.